Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. So we have a new but somewhat predictable wrinkle in the entire discussion that's now happening around the Democrats' infrastructure bill, social spending bill, and this debate that's happening not only between Democrats and Republicans, but also within Democrats trying to bring Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema on board with getting something passed at some point relatively soon. The new wrinkle is that there are reports that Joe Manchin is considering leaving the Democratic Party, which Joe Manchin has immediately denied and said are BS, which to me doesn't really mean much at all and is almost predictable that Joe Manchin would deny it, because just the rumor floating is probably enough to achieve what one might imagine Joe Manchin would want to achieve by threatening to leave the Democratic Party, which is to push Democrats to say, whoa, 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 okay. It's sort of like, so people are having an argument. One person pulls out a gun and everybody, whoa, okay, no, you're good. So let's talk about it. First of all, the report is in Mother Jones by David Corn. David Corn has a good track record. I tend to believe that at least David Corn's report is believable. Now, whether someone lied to David Corn, okay, you could talk about that. 20 hours ago, Scoop: Manchin tells associates he's considering leaving the Democratic Party and has an exit plan. He could pull the trigger if he doesn't get his way on the Build Back Better bill. In recent days, Joe Manchin has told associates that he's considering leaving the Democratic Party if President Joe Biden and Democrats on Capitol Hill do not agree to his demand to cut the size of the social infrastructure bill basically in half, from 3.5 trillion to 1.75 trillion, according to people who have heard Manchin discuss this. Manchin has said if this were to happen, he would declare himself an American independent, not a Republican, and he has devised a detailed exit strategy for his departure. This is a little too detailed to imagine it's all made up. I'll give you my thought as to what is actually going on. Manchin told associates he has a two-step plan for exiting the party. First, he would send a letter to Senator Chuck Schumer, the top Senate Democrat, removing himself from the Democratic leadership of the Senate. He's vice chair of Senate Democrats' Policy and Communication Committee. Manchin hopes that would send a signal. He would then wait and see if that move has any impact on negotiations. After about a week, he said he would change his voter registration from Democrat to independent. Now, here's the key question about all of this. It is unclear whether in this scenario, Manchin would end up caucusing with the Democrats, which would allow them to continue to control the Senate, or side with the Republicans and place the Senate in Republican hands. In either event, he would hold great sway over this half of Congress. Look at the way in which this guy is now able to essentially hold hostage the Democratic Party, not only when it comes to the infrastructure bill, but even within control of the Senate. Because understand that the majority for the Democrats right now in the Senate is Kamala Harris. It's 50-50, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans in terms of caucusing. Bernie and Angus King, independents, caucus with Democrats. And Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote in the cases of 50-50. If Joe Manchin does this routine, but says, no, I'm like Bernie and Angus King, I caucus with Democrats, you still essentially have a 50-50 situation. This is regardless of how Manchin votes on any individual bill. Important to keep in mind. If Manchin no longer caucuses with Democrats, you have a 51-49 majority for Republicans. And now Mitch McConnell takes control and has sway over what is even a discussion in the Senate. Dramatically different situation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Joe Manchin very quickly denied this. He said the report is BS, period, and said, I have no control over the rumors, but it's BS. For all we know, Joe Manchin arranged to have the rumor floated himself, because even the rumor alone is a threat. It's a threat. And whether he's really thinking about doing it or not, putting this out there can serve to pull Democrats over into being more, into placating him more than they already have. But ultimately, what this comes down to is, does this guy in the long-term caucus with Democrats or not? He's not saying he might become a Republican, although in basically every state but West Virginia, he's a Republican, I mean, quite frankly. The potential of the gavel going back to Mitch McConnell is a real threat. So it's, on the one hand, maybe a carefully crafted move to threaten this in this way and then deny it. On the other hand, it is a real threat. I mean, we can't, when we spoke to Bill Scher on Tuesday on the show, and Bill Scher said, for all the arguments about primary him or not, or this, that, the other thing, if it weren't for Joe Manchin being a Democrat, if Joe Manchin were a Republican, or if Joe Manchin was replaced with a Republican, there's not even the possibility of this bill. It's just dead. And so he does have the sway that at the end of the day, we can say this guy should not have the power that he has. And I'm right there with you. I'm the one who said in the first week after the November 2020 election, Joe Manchin is going to have a lot of power in this upcoming Senate. But I don't see the solution being kick him out of the Democratic Party or primary him, which probably leads in West Virginia to a Republican winning. The only solution is win more seats. Now, if you lose Manchin but gain 2 seats or 3 seats or 4 seats, you've still got a majority. Okay. But just saying, let's figure out how to get rid of Joe Manchin, it just doesn't check out mathematically. And the problem is Democrats don't have more seats at the end of the day. So we'll see how this, what happens. But Joe Manchin denying the rumor, I don't think I would put too much weight into that because of all the reasons we mentioned. Let me know what you think. We have the unsurprising revelation, which I've mentioned a half a dozen times in the last year and a half of the pandemic, that COVID conspiracies are linked to and pushing people towards anti-Semitism. This shouldn't really surprise too many people if you've been watching this show. And we're going to talk about this new report, which is very interesting. Technology Review has a summary of the report by Charlotte G., which says, COVID conspiracy theories are driving people to anti-Semitism online. Old and overtly anti-Semitic fantasies are gaining new adherents, depending on your preference. And far-right activists have been working to convert anti-lockdown beliefs into anti-Semitism too. So it's happening both ways. A warning, conspiracy theories about COVID are helping disseminate anti-Semitic beliefs to a wider audience, warns a new report by the anti-racist advocacy group Hope Not Hate. The report says not only has the pandemic revived interest in the New World Order conspiracy theory of a secret Jewish-run elite that aims to run the world, but far-right activists have also worked to convert people's anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine beliefs into active anti-Semitism. Worst offenders, the authors easily managed to find anti-Semitism on all 9 platforms they investigated, including TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Some of it uses coded language to avoid detection and moderation algorithms. Much of it is overt and discoverable. Unsurprisingly, the authors found a close link between the amount of anti-Semitism on a platform and how lightly or loosely it is moderated. The laxer the moderation, the bigger the problem of anti-Semitism. We've talked before about how shadow government, New World Order conspiracy theories have a lot of different flavors, many of which are anti-Semitic. We've talked about that for a long time. So that's one kind of piece of this. But the report, which is really very much worth looking at, has an entire section. We're going to link to it in the description to the YouTube clip for the story, called Conspiracy Ideologies, COVID-19, and Anti-Semitism. And I would, go through it. It has a bunch of different ways in which all of this stuff links to anti-Semitism. One aspect of this is a lot of New World Order, one world government, shadow government, COVID conspiracies are interlinked with widespread and longstanding anti-Semitic conspiracies where the people doing the shadow government are the Jews. Could be mixed in with the Bilderbergs or the Trilateral Commission, or it's the Rothschilds, or, there's different kind of flavors of it. But New World Order, shadow government, very much linked to anti-Semitism. Number 2, sometimes it's just the individuals they blame are Jewish individuals. Soros is one classic example. The other aspect of this that we've seen is the trivialization of the Holocaust in COVID conspiracies, the wearing of the yellow stars, or of the syringe swastikas that we've seen floating around. That's been happening a lot, and that's mentioned here. So the article, the report rather, talks about anti-Semitism as a conspiracy tradition, just like most of these conspiratorial enclaves have anti-Semitic Jew hatred there. It specifically talks about these various trivializations of the Holocaust. It talks about the role of the internet specifically, and that's a section that's very much worth looking at. It talks about the spread of anti-Semitic conspiracy ideologies during the pandemic in Europe. It talks about 5G. 5G, again, you have to understand how all of these tropes go together, but they have the Jewish control of business thing, and 5G is a business thing. And so you have that blending together quite easily. It goes into specific examples in different countries, and the list of countries is so long, as you can see here, that I'm not going to read it all to you. And the other aspect of this is far-right recruitment from the conspiracy scene. So this is just even folks who fall for one conspiracy theory or another related to COVID and then end up in these Facebook groups or different circles, even if they are not previously anti-Semitic or even link the COVID stuff to anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitic right-wingers, white nationalists, etc., know that these are fertile recruiting grounds for pulling people into the next step. And if they already have started to believe there's some kind of one world conspiracy or involving Soros and bankers and Bill Gates, whatever. I know Bill Gates isn't Jewish, but the point is, if you're already in that universe, to say, well, have you noticed that a lot of the people that are part of this thing happen to be Jewish, and here's a whole bunch of other things that Jews are responsible for. And then also, I think it's worth mentioning, the idea of Jews as carrying disease, spreading disease, which is a very, very old idea. So many of us intuitively suspected that there were there was mixed in, right, anti-Semitism into a lot of this stuff. The signals were all there. Sometimes it's explicit, sometimes it's implicit. And here it's sort of like an all of the above type of scenario. So check out the report from Hope Not Hate. I don't think you'll find anything particularly shocking if you've been following anti-Semitism for any period of time, but the detail with which they break it down and show you how, in Albania, here's how it's manifesting, versus in the Netherlands and Spain, it's taking this other, it has this other flavor. Very well done and very interesting. So check that out. Let me know your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter at @dpacman. We're going to take a quick break, and we've got a tremendous program for you today. One of our sponsors is Blinkist, who's been supporting the David Pakman Show longer than any other sponsor. Blinkist is the app that lets you listen to or read an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. Blinkist is the way to absorb those books you can't make time for. Blinkist takes top nonfiction titles, pulls out the book's key takeaways and insights, and gives it to you in the form of a text or audio explainer that you can consume in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, now you actually do have time to learn about all the things you've been wanting to tackle. On the Blinkist app, I just listened to This Is Your Mind on Plants by the great Michael Pollan. Super interesting, the history of caffeine and so many other things. Blinkist has you covered on podcasts too. Blinkist takes long episodes of popular podcasts and distills them into audio you can listen to in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, you can become knowledgeable about so many different things. You can have conversations with people about more topics. Blinkist makes you more well-rounded. Try Blinkist for free and get 25% off a subscription. Go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. The link is down below. All right, let's keep going. Remember that we do depend on folks like you signing up on our website to fund the program, to fund staff salaries and health insurance and all of these things. I would love for you to sign up on my website, joinpacman.com. You get a bunch of great member benefits, including an extra show that we do just for our members every single day. Joinpacman.com is the place. Also, another invitation, this one free. This one costs nothing. Join the discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit, which you can find at davidpakman.com/Reddit. About 33,000, believe it or not, and many people don't believe it, about 33,000 of our viewers and listeners are now subscribed to the subreddit. A few posts I spotted this morning that I thought were interesting. One user who goes by the moniker Fallen Knight says Dave Rubin is becoming one of the more dangerous voices on the right. This may sound like a joke, but I've noticed Dave Rubin's language get more and more extreme. I used to watch a show years ago until it turned into a libertarian echo chamber. He's very obviously a moron and a grifter. However, his use of the word evil to describe anything from left-wing pundits to media outlets to the government is becoming more and more common. This is hardly a societal barometer, but his Twitter feed and YouTube videos are filled with people foaming at the mouth with contempt for liberals. I've noticed this more on his channel than even some of the more well-known pundits like Ben Shapiro. Yeah, I think what might be going on, if you look at Rubin's YouTube channel stats, which we did on a stream not long ago, as some people mentioned it, the views on his channel are extremely low. And it almost seems like the cachet of him abandoning the left and going to the right and, all this stuff and being a Trump supporter. The initial jolt from that maybe is fading. And so when that happens, sometimes people have to keep upping the ante, becoming more and more salacious in order to titillate their audience. That may be going on. I'm not really sure, but I'd be curious to hear from the audience about what you think is going on with Dave Rubin, if you're paying attention. User Dragon Fruit is delicious, I have to tell you, says argument against Trump run in 2024 and writes, if Trump runs again in 2024, would it not be a humorous argument to make that since he never lost his reelection campaign, that he's ineligible to run in 24 due to term limits? There's no real hope that this lawsuit would succeed other than forcing Trump and his campaign to admit that he did lose the prior election. Yeah, this has been brought up before, which is it's this sort of like funny idea. You have to enter the world of stupid in order to even think this way. But if Trump really did win in November of 2020, then really he can't run in 24 because that would be his third term. But I'm sure that they would argue they know how to defeat that. And they would say, you can't you can't be elected and serve more than 2 terms. And although we believe Trump won in November of 2020, he didn't serve a second term and therefore is still eligible. Like, they would easily defeat that. But of course, you're making an astute point. A user Reflex Point on the subreddit is worried about the Democratic Party and says, do we have any charismatic leaders in the pipeline? Who do you think the future up and comers are? The type of Democrat that could win big in the post-Biden era. I remember when Obama gave his speech at the DNC in 2004. And even though I'd never heard of him, I knew right away he was going to be president one day. I just didn't think it would be so soon after. But nobody right now is giving me that rising star feeling like Obama did in 2004. I know some will probably say AOC, but honestly, I don't think she'd be ever be viable in a nationwide election. So I don't know. Anytime anybody says never about anything in American politics, I step away because, many of us would have said someone like Donald Trump will never be president. Trump will never be president. And we would have all been wrong. So I don't know that I'm ready to say AOC could never be viable nationally. But if you want to think about who's charismatic, I think John Ossoff is an interesting character. He has the potential to get pretty, prominent depending on his path in the Senate. He's a Georgia senator, Democratic senator. I think he's quite charismatic. In some sense, I find so much, and during the 2020 Democratic primary, I found so much about Pete Buttigieg not particularly thrilling, but I do think that if he continues to crush these right-wing hosts on TV and be the kind of articulate guy that he is, maybe Pete Buttigieg would have a bright political future. He's a very good communicator, as some people are pointing out. I think at one point I might have wondered about Gavin Newsom, but I don't know. I think he's sort of beleaguered right now. Eric Garcetti, I don't know. I mean, I'm struggling to come up with really exciting figures. Let's put it that way. And I think it's a concern for Democrats. Like, who are the up and coming charismatic leaders? I'm not so sure. Join the discussion on the subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. All right. I think you're just going to absolutely love the absurdity of this. After much waiting and excitement and anticipation and waiting with bated breath, he's finally done it. Donald Trump has announced his new media group and a new free speech platform called Truth Social. Finally, you will be freed from the chains of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and TikToks and all these different places that suppress your speech. You will have full free speech on Truth Social, except not really. Let's go through this piece by piece. First, the announcement. TMTG announcing, this is yesterday, late yesterday, announcing Trump Media and Technology Group. Trump Media and Technology Group and Digital World Acquisition Corporation have entered into a definitive merger agreement providing for a business combination that will result in Trump Media and Technology Group becoming a publicly listed company subject to regulatory and stockholder approval. The transaction values Trump Media and Technology Group at an initial enterprise value of $875 million. Wow. With a potential additional earnout of $825 million in additional shares. Going on to say, Trump Media and Technology Group's mission is to create a rival to the liberal media consortium and fight back against the big tech companies of Silicon Valley, which have used their unilateral power to silence opposing voices in America. Just wait until what I'm going to show you goes up on the screen. Trump Media and Technology Group will soon be launching a social network named Truth Social. Truth Social is now available for pre-order in the Apple App Store. Truth Social plans to begin its beta launch for invited guests in November of 21. A nationwide rollout is expected in the first quarter of 22. You can sign up at truthsocial.com. Trump, the chairman of the Trump Media and Technology Group, stated, imagine Trump as a tech CEO. I created Truth Social and TMTG to stand up to the tyranny of big tech. We live in a world where the Taliban has a huge presence on Twitter, yet your favorite American president has been silenced. This is unacceptable, says Trump. I am excited to send out my first truth on Truth Social very soon. TMTG was founded with a mission to give voice to all. Wow, that's great. I'm excited to soon begin sharing my thoughts on Truth Social and fight back against big tech. Everyone asks me, sir, why doesn't someone stand up to big tech? Well, we will be soon. Don Jr. already appearing last night on Fox News to promote it, and it's going to be an exercise in unfettered free speech for all. Anything goes, folks.
And free network for people to be able to communicate, to exercise your First Amendment rights.
Right.
And so tonight, my father signed a definitive merger agreement to form what will ultimately be the Trump Media and Technology.
It's funny how Don calls it a definitive merger agreement, yet the announcement said it's all subject to approval. But okay, that's not the focus.
Group and Truth Social, a platform for everyone to express their feelings. Big tech and all of those on the left for so long, Sean, have been saying, well, if you don't like the rules that we really enforce only one way on our platforms, go create your own.
Right.
And so we did just that. So that's going to launch very soon. We're going to be in beta testing in the next few weeks.
Beta.
Full launch. First quarter of 22.
Yeah.
It's going to be exciting, and we're looking to give a voice back to the American people.
Wow. Well, that's all really, really exciting. Express your feelings, no censorship, all of this stuff. It's great. Except, the terms of service of Trump's Truth Social don't allow criticizing Truth Social. What's going on? The 23rd rule, which I'm putting up on the screen for Trump's planned social media site, is you can't make fun of or criticize his social media site. Number 23, you are not allowed to, quote, disparage, tarnish, or otherwise harm. Wait a second. In our opinion, us and or the site. Folks, that's not very free speechy, isn't it? And it's important to mention, on Facebook, you can criticize Facebook. On YouTube, you can criticize YouTube. We've done it when we feel we've been treated unfairly by YouTube. We publish it to YouTube and it's fine. On Twitter, you can criticize Twitter. On Instagram, you can criticize Instagram. They don't ban people for criticizing them. And yet, on the Trump social site, which is all about freedom and free speech and everybody, no censorship, you are not allowed to criticize the site itself. Now, at the risk of getting a little bit into the weeds, the other funny thing about this is that the terms of service also include a dispute resolution clause that Trump's lawyers just got done arguing are unenforceable in a different venue, according to Brad Heath, who's the DC crime and justice reporter. The rules for Trump's site have this dispute resolution thing, which says any dispute, controversy, or claim you have arising related to these terms of service, a breach thereof, or your use of the site shall be exclusively submitted and decided by binding arbitration administered by the American Arbitration Association. Any legal action of whatever nature brought against us, brought by us against you, may be commenced or prosecuted in the state and federal courts in Broward County, and you consent to the same. So basically they're saying, if you come after us, it's all going to be handled by this arbitration association, which is great for them. But if we bring a cause against you, it's going to court. And this is exactly what Trump's lawyers just got done arguing is actually not enforceable. So they don't care about principles of free speech or no censorship. They don't care about principles when it comes to arbitration. They'll argue one thing if it's good for them, and they'll argue the opposite if it's good for them. And we know this because even now, they only care about censorship and silencing in terms of service when they perceive that a right-wing voice is being limited, which sometimes happens when they're inciting violence or spreading horrible disinformation. But now they don't care about those very same principles. As I've told you hundreds of times, and here is more proof, it's just about what benefits us right now. These people are pathetic, and maybe just as pathetic, Trump's social media site was already hacked. So I already told you about the announcement of Trump's Truth social media site, which doesn't even allow you to criticize it on its own site. Not very free speechy. This is just a funny coda on this story. Trump's Truth Social was hacked within hours of the announcement. Newsweek reporting, former President Trump's new social media platform reportedly hacked within hours of its announcement. People were able to, the Truth Social app will begin a beta test for invited guests in November. But people were able to sign up to create accounts using a publicly available link. Drew Harwell, a tech reporter for the Washington Post, said on Twitter, I literally just registered Mike Pence. The site hasn't even launched and it's already vulnerable. In a subsequent tweet, he revealed that account had been suspended. And if we look at, actually, I don't have access to it in the immediate, but already problematic. In another tweet, Harwell said it appeared the Donald J. Trump account on Truth Social had been hacked. A screenshot Harwell shared showed the pinned post was of a defecating animal. However, it's not clear if the account belongs to Trump. Right. The Trump may have posted a picture of a defecating animal. It's not clear, but it appears as though it's probably been hacked. It's been censored here so that it's family friendly. So that's pretty exciting. Meanwhile, Mikhail Thalen, a reporter for the Daily Dot, tweeted he was able to create an account using the handle Donald Trump before the public domain for the site was taken down, was just able to set up an account using the handle Donald Trump on Truth Social. Although the site isn't open, a URL was discovered allowing users to sign up anyway. It's now been taken offline. Complete and total chaos. Absolute complete and total chaos. So already apparently hacked and vulnerable, which is pretty similar to what we saw happening with the Mike Pillow platform as well. So a lot of things going wrong quickly in the early hours. My prediction, Trump's Truth Social platform is going to lead to a lot of comedy. We'll have more on this on the David Pakman Show Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's great to welcome to the program today from my undergraduate alma mater, Dr. Peg Riley, professor at UMass Amherst, who runs an undergraduate research lab focused on the discovery and preclinical testing of novel antimicrobials. Great to have you on. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
So, okay, I mean, maybe just to get into this, and eventually we're going to kind of relate this to the COVID virus and the suggestion of things like ivermectin or azithromycin for possible treatment or mitigation. When we think about antibiotics to treat illness generally, what are the sort of issues that we worry about coming up, including antibiotic resistance at a population level and other things?
Sure. Well, as most of your viewers will know, we use antibiotics in medicine to either prevent or eliminate an infection by bacteria. So they're very powerful, fantastic. They developed the name magic bullet for a good reason. They'll wipe out a staph infection or what have you rapidly. Now, when we first started using those in the 1950s, we didn't understand that we live with a microbiome. And that means we have bacteria and other microbes in us, on us, around us, and they're making us healthy, by and large. But antibiotics don't know the difference between what's a healthy microbe in our microbiome and what's the pathogen we want it to kill. So when you take an antibiotic for a strep throat or an ear infection or something much more serious, you stand the chance of really wiping out a lot of the good bacteria in your gut, the lactobacilli, the bifidobacter, all those things that you hear about in kimchi and yogurt. Well, all of those can be decimated as well. And so when we take antibiotics when we shouldn't, which is actually quite often, we could potentially make our health worse rather than better.
When we think about the long term of antibiotic use, if my research is correct, there's only a few types of antibiotics. Even though there's many specific ones, there's really only a few families. Is the path forward that eventually some new type of antibiotic medication will be necessary?
Well, I sure hope so, David, or we're not going to survive long. We are now in what we call the post-antibiotic era. And that was designated by the World Health Organization about 7 years ago now, where we have used, abused, and overused antibiotics to the point where we have pathogens that can cause fatal disease in humans that no longer respond to antibiotics. And I want to throw in one other sideline here, which we often don't think about. In point of fact, 80% of our antibiotics are not used for human health. They're used by the agricultural systems to either produce fatter, healthier pigs, or to keep blight off of apples or tomatoes. And so we're basically using these critical drugs designed for humans originally to make food cheaper. And that's something that society has to talk about and decide if that's a good route to be taking.
When we talk about the types of antimicrobials that you work on and look at developing, what's different about those versus antibiotics?
Great question. So with an antibiotic, it is chosen by a pharmaceutical company because it kills as much as possible. In other words, as many bacterial species as is possible. And the reason is the cost of developing and getting through clinical trials an antibiotic. It's several $billion. Now, picture that I have urinary tract infection and I want to take a drug to treat it. That's almost always caused by E. coli, which is a species of bacteria in your gut, in my gut. Normally doesn't bother us. In fact, we're happy to have it for lots of reasons. But when it gets into our urinary tract system, it causes problems for some people. So imagine that I could give you a pill that didn't kill everything in your microbiome, but just killed E. coli. Now, picture that world. Now my microbiome is happy. I've killed the E. coli, and the selection for what you mentioned earlier, antibiotic resistance, is much lower. So when I take a conventional antibiotic, any bacterium in my body that can have a mutation that will cause it to be able to resist that drug, to fight it off, will be selected for, and they'll increase in frequency in my body. And that's what's happened over the last 50 years. That's why we have multi-drug or totally drug-resistant pathogens to deal with.
So let's maybe now introduce the topic of COVID-19. We've seen the suggestions, and some of these things have been studied, that azithromycin, known as Zithromax or a Z-Pak, even though it's an antibiotic and COVID-19 is a virus, that in some situations it can have an antiviral property, and maybe it should be used for treating COVID-19. The placebo-controlled studies I've seen don't seem to show that it actually does work in that way, but it is something that's being studied. Antiparasitic ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, etc. What are there properties to some of these that could work, at least theoretically, when you're dealing with a virus?
Well, what they might do is impact something in your body that then helps you weather COVID better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because these drugs are not designed to kill a virus. It's in fact very challenging for us to come up with medications that will kill viruses. And that's why we don't have a lot of them. It's not that we haven't tried. Heaven forbid, we've actually tried very hard. Now, a drug to kill a protist, a drug to kill a bacterium could impact you because maybe you have an underlying condition that is caused by a bacterium or a protist, and that when you get COVID, it exasperates either the COVID or exasperates the underlying condition. And so possibly that's why some people report feeling better when they take ivermectin, for example. Now, personally, I'm a scientist. I believe in data. And until the FDA tells me, or shows me better yet, the clinical trials, that means double-blind, placebo-based trials. And for those who don't know what that means the doc who's administering the trial has no idea which patient got which. That they cannot bias their interpretation of a patient's status of health because they don't know who got the sugar pill. And that's the gold standard, and that's why it takes so long to get drugs approved by FDA. Those are tough studies to carry out, especially during a pandemic.
When we think about the way in which sometimes one medication or a few over time, like at one point it was hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin plus zinc, with or without zinc, ivermectin, etc. When we think about these things entering the kind of media discussion and becoming popularized, sometimes on one political side or sometimes more broadly, what do you think underlies this? Is it that when there's cheap, widely available medications around and no clear treatment, doctors say, let's throw something at it and just kind of see what happens? Is that the genesis of a lot of these things?
You know, I've never spoken to a medical doctor who would have used any of those alternatives. So I can't respond directly. What I can tell you is if we compare this to vaccine hesitancy, for example, and I teach classes of 400 undergraduates, none of whom are science majors, and many of them start out in my class agreeing that they are hesitant about getting vaccinated, and it came from their parents or from their neighborhood or what have you. And it's really an anxiety because you don't understand the science. And we scientists haven't taken the time to find ways to help you understand the science. So I blame the scientists, not the anti-vaxxers, if you will. I think we do a better job.
What tends to work in the classes at changing the perspective on vaccination?
I show them the history of the success of vaccines. I show them how a clinical trial is designed, how it's interpreted, what are the issues that one has to confront when interpreting the data. So without diving into the details, I give them the sense of how rigorous science, particularly science that is being used to impact human health, is carried out under, and the incredible role the FDA plays in being the gatekeeper. Because there are a lot of scientists that are so excited about their ideas. I mean, my drugs, I would love to give them to my neighbors right now. I would love to, but none of them are FDA approved, so I can't.
Right.
And you can't help but be excited about your drug or your idea, and that could be tempting in a time where there's a pandemic, where individuals are dying. If there's something, why not try it? That's the sort of attitude. Maybe that accounts for why medical professionals would do this, but I urge them to stop.
When it comes to the big picture impact of this period of time during which people are maybe washing their hands more frequently, wearing masks, not being around people as much, one fear that some have expressed is this may attenuate the strength of one's immune system merely by stopping a lot of these little interactions with different sorts of pathogens that you interact with all the time and you sort of build resistance to, so that you may come out of the pandemic not having gotten COVID, but maybe generally less protected from an immunity standpoint against things we encounter on a regular basis. Is there something to that? How long would one have to be, isolated from pathogens? And the other question is, if you're still eating food from grocery stores and going to the gas station occasionally, are you even really fully isolated from pathogens anyway?
Thank you. That's a great question and a great point you made at the end. So first of all, one of the greatest impacts on this new approach to life we're in, masking, isolation, separation, 6 feet or more, is going to be found in the nursing homes, and it already is being found in the nursing homes. Their microbiomes are far less diverse on average than an individual who may be just isolated in their home with family members. So we know that. And less diverse microbiomes in general are not as what we would call healthy. They're not as able to stimulate our immune system, just as you were talking about a moment ago. But we don't live in vacuums, and we don't live in sterile chambers. And so going for a walk, getting a little dirt on your hands, believe it or not, eating the kinds of foods you were talking about, apples and high fiber, fiber-rich diets, are going to stimulate the good microbes that are already possibly present in your gut and get you back into the realm you want to be. So certainly eating fermented foods is always a good idea. That helps get the microbes enriched in your body that are so protective, like lactobacilli or bifidobacter.
So for the average person who had a year and a half of less socializing and wearing a mask when out, for example, is that really going to impact their immune system in a significant way?
I don't have the data to answer that question, but I can tell you from a sort of practical perspective, good as masks are, that does not keep any of us from using our hands to touch things.
Right.
And it does not keep any of us from walking inside and touching our face or our arm or what have you. So again, we're not living in a sterile environment. We're limiting the spread of things that carry easily in the air. That's what we're doing. And that's why flu essentially evaporated last year.
Right.
And in fact, I went back and watched an old lecture that I gave to my kids in this big class of non-scientists. And I remember right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, before it was a pandemic, they were still in the class with me, 400 of them in an auditorium. And I said, guys, I'm going to let you go today because we're getting signs that this is highly infectious. But there's good news on the horizon. I said, you won't get flu this year.
Right.
And they just laughed as they were happy to leave the lecture room.
And it turned out to be quite accurate, in fact.
Oh, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, it was easy to predict. I mean, you wear masks, you don't touch each other. Gee, I wonder what'll happen with flu.
Right. Right. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see this flu season that's coming right now. Dr. Peg Riley, professor at UMass Amherst, really appreciate your time and your insights today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join you.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the Daily Bonus Show, the commercial-free Daily Show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. A ton of you asked me to talk about this recent Bari Weiss appearance on CNN. Bari Weiss was a reporter for the New York Times and left under circumstances where she claimed that her views basically weren't welcome. She was ostracized. She was made to feel uncomfortable. So she went and launched a Substack, and she appeared on CNN with Brian Stelter. We're going to look at the clip. Now, I want to mention, I am no fan of Brian Stelter. Like, Brian Stelter is very controversial in like media, right-wing media circles. A lot of people don't like him. I don't really care about Brian Stelter. He said some things that I agree with, and sometimes he's kind of wacky. Whatever. This is not an adjudication of Brian Stelter. Bari Weiss, sometimes she says things that I find sensible, and sometimes she makes no sense. But this clip is being made out to be sort of like this incredible takedown of the media establishment by Bari Weiss for the things that people aren't allowed to talk about. My perspective, and I'll tell you up front, rather than saving it for the end, my perspective on this is that it is the exact type of hyperbole about so-called cancel culture and censorship that really is barely going on. And a lot of right-wingers love this. I think it's all pretty dumb. Let's just jump right into it and take a listen.
You write, there are tens of millions of Americans who aren't on the hard left or the hard right who feel the world has gone mad. So in what ways has the world gone mad?
Well, when you have the chief reporter on the beat of COVID for the New York Times talking about how questioning or pursuing the question of the lab leak is racist, the world has gone mad.
Okay, now, I agree with her there. Investigating whether something came from a certain country, absent anything else, is not inherently racist. It was used to justify, and it fueled xenophobia against Asian Americans. But simply saying, did this come from a lab in China? That is not inherently racist. That I agree with.
When you're not able to say out loud and in public that there are differences between men and women, the world has gone mad.
That's absurd. You can find some places where, I guess someone might be saying there are no differences between men and women. I've still not seen that. And I know that the right loves to talk about that when they say, it's not that we hate trans people. It's that you're not even allowed to say there's a difference between men and women. I've just not seen that. I've seen no evidence that that's the case. When
we're not allowed to acknowledge that rioting is rioting and it is bad.
Again, when we saw, by the way, rioting, the real riots were January 6th. And many of the people claiming that police brutality protests were riots won't call what happened on the 6th a riot. Like, put that hypocrisy aside. The left that I'm a part of and that I see says destruction of property and violence as part of protests is bad. Who's not allowed to say that?
And that silence is not violence, but violence is violence. The world has gone mad. When we're not able to say that Hunter Biden's laptop is a story worth pursuing, the world has gone mad.
The story has been pursued. The story has she seems now to be taking issue with the fact that many media outlets looked at the story and said it just doesn't meet the evidentiary rigor for us to publish it.
When in the name of progress, young school children, as young as kindergarten, are being separated in public schools because of their race.
Now that I don't even know what she's talking about. I looked into that. I just couldn't find that. I don't know what she's talking about with that one.
And that is called progress rather than segregation. The world has gone mad. There are dozens of examples that I could share with you and with your viewers. And you
often say,
everyone
allowed.
Sort of knows this. And
you say we're not allowed, we're not able.
Between...
Who's the people stopping the conversation? Who are they?
People that work at networks, frankly, like the one I'm speaking on right now, who try and claim that, it was racist to investigate the lab leak theory. It was.
But
let's
just
take an example.
Right. She's repeating that she had one example from one person at the New York Times. Almost no one is saying that. That's not a predominant opinion anywhere.
I'm just saying that when you say allowed, I just think it's a provocative thing to say. You say we're not allowed to talk about these things, but they're all over the internet. I can Google them. I can find them everywhere. I've heard about every story you mentioned. So I'm just suggesting, of course, people are allowed to cover whatever they want to cover.
But you and I both know, and it would be delusional to claim otherwise, that touching your finger to an increasing number of subjects that have been deemed third rail by the mainstream institutions and increasingly by some of the tech companies will lead to reputational damage, perhaps you losing your job, your children sometimes being demonized as well.
Now it starts to get like very, very outrageous.
So what happens is a kind of internal self-censorship.
So now she shifts to, well, it's not actually that no one's allowed to talk about it. It's that people are self-censoring. Now, does self-censorship exist in some cases? Sure. I've talked about how I've self-censored in some cases. But this is very similar to when, the big thing was, the left is just overrun with identity politics. No, at the time it was like, yeah, identity politics in the Women's March got a little toxic and saying Jewish women aren't intersectional enough to be part of that was going on. But by and large, the left at that time was concerned with economic issues and environment and the start of the pandemic and all these different things. This is always the idea. They exaggerate it and they say, this is an epidemic. This is crazy. And then when you say, well, so who's not allowed to talk about? Well, you're allowed, but you might suffer reputational damage or people are self-censoring or whatever the case may be. But then with a lot of these examples, it's literally one example. And the issue of the origins of COVID, it's been looked at everywhere. We've talked about it. We didn't shy away. A lot of other, colleagues on the left have looked at it. What she wants, fundamentally what she wants. There are so many people that think she really crushed CNN and the media establishment there. All she did was argue for freedom from the consequences of speech. And a lot of these people that are sort of these anti-wokeist, free speech, no matter what type people, often what they really want is freedom from the consequences of speech. And no one gets that. And when they say we're not allowed to talk about, they're often talking about those things on TV shows with global audiences, and no one is restricting their ability to talk about that. She was on CNN talking about how on CNN you can't talk about any of these things. No one's talking over her. No one's kicking her off. They're things that CNN has talked about. Now, to the extent that she makes okay points, like she was right. There was that New York Times reporter and some, little bit of blip about it's racist to say the virus might have come from China. No, it's not fundamentally racist. It is racist to then take that and attack Asian Americans and discriminate against Asian people, right? But the entire thing seems sort of unhinged, and she seems to conflate being allowed to talk about things with having to take debunked stories seriously and giving them more and more and more and more airtime, or the freedom from the consequences of your speech. And you just don't get that. Nobody gets that. I don't get that. Nobody gets that. Consequences to speech is part of free speech. So for me, this was not a particularly titillating clip at all. And it certainly was not the takedown that many on the right made it out to be. Hey, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to mention it. One of the things that Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, has said Trump did, and that we know Trump did, is the same asset. If he wants to avoid taxes, he says it's not worth a lot. And if he wants to get a loan against it or be, richer on the Forbes list, he'll say it's worth more. We now have a specific example, and it's all related to a Trump golf club. The AP reporting Trump golf club reportedly faces new criminal probe over taxes. Westchester Club allegedly misled officials to reduce taxes. And fundamentally, what Donald Trump did here is the same golf club. He said in one place, this thing's worth more than $50 million. And elsewhere, he said it's only worth $1.4 million. Rachel Maddow explains it really well. Let's take a look.
The numbers here are sort of easy to keep in your head. The town is telling him to pay taxes on a golf course that they say is worth $15 million. He's saying, no, I won't. It's only worth $1.4 million.
Right.
But that same year in 2016, he files his financial disclosure statement as a presidential candidate. He files it in May 2016. United States Office of Government Ethics, Executive Branch Personnel Public Financial Disclosure Report. The town said the golf course, again, was worth $15 million. He said, no, I'm not paying taxes on a $15 million property. It's only worth $1.4 million. But look at what he put in his official financial disclosure that same year. His official financial disclosure, line item 93, Trump National Golf Club, Westchester County. Value? Over $50 million. So to one part of the government, he's telling them this golf course is worth over $50 million. But for the tax authorities, he's saying it's $1.4 million.
Right.
How can something simultaneously be worth over $50 million, according to Trump, and only $1.4 million, also according to Trump? How can that be true at the same time?
So this is actually, it's really actually quite simple. This is exactly what Michael Cohen described. This is exactly what has been otherwise reported that Trump does. If he needs to pump up his net worth or he needs to borrow money, he goes, look at this beautiful asset. Look at this perfect golf course worth $50 million. Loan me $25 million because I've got this $50 million asset I can prop up as collateral for it. Okay. On the other hand, if it's, hey, you've got to pay taxes. You've got to pay taxes on this $50 million, or as the town believed it was, $15 million asset. Trump goes, listen, I don't have any money. First of all, this is only worth $1.4 million. So the taxes should be levied on that amount. And I don't even have the money to pay taxes as if it were worth $15 million. This is similar to keeping two sets of books. It's not the same. It's similar to keeping two sets of books, which is not allowed. And this is now part of this new probe. So no big shock, just another data point that this was a technique that Donald Trump used. We knew it already, but that's another data point of Trump's usage of it. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an idea from a viewer's boyfriend, I believe. Are masks making people behave in crazy ways?
Hi, David. So my boyfriend pointed out to me when we went to the grocery store that everybody's acting a little bit more crazy and on edge, and maybe that things will go back to normal as far as people behaving normally when the mask mandates get lifted. And I'm from El Paso, Texas, and I told him I feel like everybody went into like this mentality where they did get jailed. Well, not in a jail per se, but they did go into kind of like house arrest, and we were all...
They felt like they were in jail by having to wear a mask.
In the house. So, I mean, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as far as... I feel like the masks have nothing to do with the way people are behaving now.
I don't know that it's the masks specifically, but I do think that to some degree, the long period where sort of like the rules of engagement around being around people were changed and masks were part of it, changed a lot of people. Some people just from being home kind of like forgot how to socialize normally. Some people are just really angry people and they're lashing out. Some people are experiencing, you know, sort of like a personal emotional crisis, mental health crisis. So I don't think it's masks per se that are making people act in crazy ways, although some of the people are acting out saying we shouldn't have to wear masks. In that sense, it's like the fact that someone wants them to wear a mask that's bothering them. But I think it's a much bigger picture thing that hopefully will start to settle as we hopefully get out of this pandemic. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Sign up at joinpacman.com to get instant access to it. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.